You're tuned in to Women in America, the podcast that dives deep into the issues shaping gender equality in the US and beyond. Hosted by Pari and Eve, public health professionals by day and content creators by passion, we bring you expert insights and actionable strategies to push the fight for equality forward in today's America. On this episode of Women in America, we chat with lifelong political resistor Beth Green on the Potluck Revolution and the connection between community and burnout. Let's dive in. Today, I have with me an absolute badass, honestly. I'm so excited for all of you to meet Beth Green. Beth has been working on the ground, boots on the ground, political resistance for about 45 years. And, you know, she was like tracked by the FBI when she was 12. She was arrested as a teenager. I mean, she knows what's up. So Beth, thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you so much, except it's longer than 45 years. You know, I'm 80 years old.
You know,
it seems I've been in trouble all my life.
Well, that's great. I love that. Good trouble is exactly what all of us should be engaging in right now.
That's right.
What got you started? I mean, if you were doing stuff at the age of 12, I need to know, like, you were absolutely born this way, you know? So like,
I was. No, I started at 9.
Amazing. Tell me about that.
Well, at 9 years old, they added the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, which I thought was trashing the separation between church and state. So I refused to salute the flag, and they threatened to expel me from elementary school.
Hold on. As a 9-year-old, who had taught you about separation of church and state?
I have no idea. I don't know. My parents weren't political. We were poor. We were poor Jews from New York, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, and I was born in 1945 at the end of the Holocaust, and I knew about injustice from the womb, you know, and I really could feel it. And in fact, at 5 years old, I was giving people lectures about their consciousness. I don't know why, but also at 9, I read a book about the Spanish Civil War, and I knew which side I was on, and I decided that I was a socialist. Now, a socialist in the pure sense, not in the sense of being a Soviet communism, but,
Right.
you know, looking for equality. So, yeah, and I mean, I was already starting the fight at that age.
That's honestly incredible. Also, I have to say, I like internally smiled when you clarified what socialism means, because only in the US has the definition of socialism being bastardized the way that it is, right? Like any other country, you describe socialism and they're just like, yeah, that's literally just what we do in our communities all the time. So,
well, you know that the way it was defined, it was really communism. But I don't dare to use the word, which is from each according to his or her ability, to each according to their need. That is the definition of communism that I read when I read Karl Marx, which nobody else did back in the day. I wanted to know what this guy said, and he was so on about the system. And that is what I call the potluck revolution. It's you bring what you got, you take what you need, and that should be the foundation of society.
I love that, Beth. Like, I've never heard that term before. One of the things that I think we as a society have been lacking is just like true community, like genuine, like,
yes,
you know, like having the village. Like I just had a baby,
yes,
so like I have that term in my head a lot, a village. People really want the village, but they're never willing to be the village. And I think that that is something that we need to work on. So Potluck Revolution, I feel like I'm going to put that on a post-it note in front of my computer and look at it every day because it's beautiful. What a concept.
It's the purpose of a society and an economy is to take care of the needs of the people and the earth. That is the only reason that we have a society. That's the only reason that we have an economy. But it has been so skewed. It's all about power and money, and it's not about taking care of needs. And that is the foundation, except even deeper than that, there is a spiritual illness in our world called the ego dominates, which is all about me. So, but we could talk about that for hours. I know we don't have hours, but that's really at the foundation of all of it. And you can see it. So on an emotional level, you can see it on a political level, on an economic level. And now it's so out of control. It's unreal.
Yeah. I mean, the ego dominates. I can think of one person that especially reflects that
Oh, yes. I
definition
don't
right
know who you're
now.
talking about.
No clue. None of us know who
No,
I'm referring to.
no, no idea. No idea.
Wait, so were you in fact expelled from elementary school?
No, they threatened, but I was expelled from college.
Oh my goodness.
I went to college at 16 and I had written a letter, but you see, we're going to get too far off if I start telling you the stories about
No,
my
I
life.
want to hear it. Beth, we're in it now. Let's do this.
Okay, okay, okay. Well, um, when I was born sick, and I've been sick all my life, and then I became really severely ill at 15, but it didn't stop me from being, alive and aware. And so we were threatened by nuclear warfare at that time. That's what we were all worrying about, banning the bomb. They had us, hiding under our desks,
Mhm.
like that's really going to help. So anyway, so I wrote a letter to New York Times about my fear as a 16-year-old
Mhm.
of radiation and the bomb and all of that, and it went all over the world. I mean, it got spread. I don't know. There was no internet in those days. In fact, there were no computers. It's a different era, and somehow it reached people. And I was contacted by some students from that letter, and they told me there was going to be a march around the White House. And so I figured, oh, yeah, thousands, right? I didn't tell my parents that I wrote the letter. I didn't tell the parents that I had agreed to go to this march around the White House.
Mhm.
And I mean, in the day, you could not cut a class on a day before Thanksgiving. This was a hunger march for Thanksgiving. And so I went into the administration and I said, I have to cut a class. I've got to go to Washington, D.C. I was in Massachusetts um, for this. And she said, you will be punished. I will teach you a lesson you never forget. And she was serious.
Mhm.
And when I came back, they put me on probation where I couldn't cut any classes. And I mean, I had been ill in bed for a year and a half. You're going to tell me I'm going to go from bed. They also had tried to expel me for not being able to carry trays, at lunch. So at that point,
And this is why we have protection laws now. Like this, yeah. Which
right.
of course certain people are trying to dismantle, but you know.
Oh, exactly. Certain people that we're not going to mention. So, yeah. So, I mean, this is 1961. There's no movement party. There's
Mhm.
no support. There's nobody there. And there were only 14 people at the White House.
I
14.
I don't
And
even know. I can't. I'm having such a hard time even picturing that because now it's like there's so many more. There's like 140 people on my shit list alone, but like let alone just like in the administration. So it's truly like amazing. I mean,
14 people. So by coincidence, my face ended up at the front page of the New York Times.
ah,
And it was my parents calling and said, is that you? So
you're like,
anyway,
no, I don't know what you're talking about.
right. So, yeah, by the end of what they got done with me, I was expelled with no hearing, nothing, and there was nobody who would support me. So that was the first time I was actually expelled from school. And I didn't get arrested until later, by the way. I
But
got
with that,
arrested 3 times, but it was later.
but that's amazing because at a time like that, when, education was everything, and it's not like you had social media or a platform to be able to even tell your story or tell your side, that you were able to rally from something like that, not just well, but like exceedingly well, like to the point where you've just created like a career in activism and are now, like that's why I was so excited to talk to you because I was like, okay, I've been doing this for only 10 years. And I know that I've got the rest of my lifetime ahead of me. And I would love to get advice from someone who's like seasoned in this space, like how do you deal with all of the bad? Because I mean, my dad always tells me that our society, like global society and global culture, is kind of like a pendulum. And he says that throughout history, we have consistently swung back and forth from
Exactly.
progressive to conservative, which I no longer like calling conservative. I just call it regressive at this point. But so let's say
You.
progressive to regressive, progressive to progressive, right? And at this point, it's hard to feel hopeful that we're going to go back to the progressive because at least within my lifetime, my activism lifetime, let's say that this is like we are going deeper into the regressive area than we have ever previously, at least from the perspective of the United States. And I'm just curious, like, how do you sort of care for yourself between these gigantic swings, in time?
I totally understand where you're coming from. Totally understand. But I also want to tell you that I lived through the McCarthy era. When I became a socialist at 9 years old and declared it, people were going to prison for being communists.
Mm,
There was, Senator McCarthy and the Army. Yeah, everybody was a communist. The House On-American Activities Committee. I also lived through the anti-war movement, and I was very close to some people in the Black Freedom Movement who were shot and killed. It's not like this isn't so different from
mm,
what it has been in the past. But I totally agree with your dad. Totally. And I knew that when Barack Obama was elected, I thought, oh, we're in trouble. You know what I mean? It's like they're going to get back. So I want you to put it in perspective. We've had some terrible times before, and I understand why this feels different because they're attacking us on every level, and the degree of income and power inequality is astronomical,
mm-hmm.
astronomical, and you don't have the government on your side, not that it always has been. So I understand all of that, but what I would like to share is going to probably surprise you.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm ready.
All right. I was so oppressed in the movement because I was a woman.
Mm,
I was the only one who was ever sober, who was not high, who had read Marx, who was analyzing things, and they had me bring the coffee because it was all male dominated,
mm,
completely male dominated. The only women who ever got to speak were the girlfriends of the honchos in the movement.
mm,
And I lived through this frustrated, shut down, shut up over and over. Not the government couldn't shut me up, but the movement could. When Trump came into office, this time I went to some protest organizations and I said, we need a positive vision for change because this is not going to stop. They shut me down. They did. They said, no, we need to learn how to talk to our neighbors who are Republicans. So it seems like I'm always out of step, Hari. So I'm
mm.
used to being an outsider. But on a very deep level, you may think that you're burnt out and need a vacation, which we all do. By the way, I totally believe in self nurturance. What do I need and am I getting it? But there's another side to it, which is way more insidious that people don't realize is that they're being shut up on an emotional, spiritual, psychological level without even knowing it. It just happened to me today. I thought, oh no, I am burnt out. I have no answers. And I was actually feeling that. And I thought that was me. And then I realized it was my husband. He's very competitive and jealous and didn't want me to have to do this interview. God bless him. He's a great man. I am basically disabled and he does everything. He does all the cooking, the shopping. I mean, everything. I can barely get out of bed. Okay. And he's done it for years. But he's got this little edge. He's got male entitlement. He thinks he, should be God and I shouldn't. And. And I looked at him and I said, it's you. And it turned out it was. He's 81 years old. He was brought up with that idea that he was entitled to be in charge, right?
Right.
And as soon as I realized that I was being suppressed, I said, oh my God, I can't wait to go on that show. And I know what this is. It isn't that we are so much burnt out, is that we are feeling like suppressed for one reason or another. It can be personal, it can be political, and it gets into your very soul, and you don't even know that it's happening.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're talking about it from a personal level, right? Which I
Yeah.
think is true for so many people. Not just in terms of like people's partners, but I have a lot of friends whose parents, for example, are massive Trump supporters. And
Mm,
I think that that's like, I don't have that experience myself, but I think that that is such an interesting family dynamic because if you look at a family in theory, it's supposed to be the people who are your ride or dies, you know, like they are supposed to be where you come, regardless of where you physically are, they're supposed to be the people where you come to feel like you're at home. And
yes,
if you're in a situation where even your closest, you know, infrastructure is not actually supportive of you expressing your emotions or your feelings or whatever,
yes,
that weighs on you in ways that I think like people might not even necessarily realize. And then Eve and I, for example, we do all of our advocacy online. And that, when you talk about suppression online, that's like very intentional suppression by an
mhm.
algorithm, right? Like your voice
Oh my
is
God.
stopped.
Yeah.
So it's so intriguing that you mentioned that because I don't think people think about it that way, but you're
No.
absolutely right. Like suppression exists in so many different ways. And it can be
Yes.
something as simple as like for myself, for example, being a woman of color walking into certain rooms, even just the makeup of individuals in that room can serve as a suppressive mechanism, right?
Absolutely. And the
And
shocking thing is we internalize it and we don't even know it. This is not about power and hierarchy. It's about mutual support, like you're talking about in the family, that we should be supported. We need everything. We are together. We can survive. That is the village. Just like you're talking about it being a mother, we all need that. You can't, I mean, I couldn't walk out on the street if somebody else didn't lay that asphalt, and it couldn't have been me, or pick those vegetables. So, but it's in the way we think, in that power dynamic of the way we think. So people get jealous and envious and try to shut you down, and you don't even know it. In the family, often there is competition. Often, um, when you're born, you have to start crying. When you're in the womb, you're automatically taken care of, right? And when you're born, you become aware of your individual existence. You're no longer just a part of a whole, which is the mother. Now, some people have a terrible time in the womb, but that's another story, right? But just as a general rule, right? And then suddenly there you are. And if you don't start crying, you're not going to get fed. And you're not going to get, and so you develop strategies for survival as an infant.
I'm like seeing the psychologist in you come out in this moment.
Everybody develops a series of strategies for survival that become our personalities that we think are us,
Mm,
but they aren't us. They are just learned behaviors. And then there's the learned behaviors, because you were talking about how difficult it is if your family is against what you're doing. There's other learned behaviors that have to do with this is important. Oh no, you should go to school to become a doctor, or you should be worrying about your 401k. I see 17-year-olds, because I'm a counselor, right, that are worrying about their 401k. I don't have one, and I'm 80. You know what I'm saying? That they're so self-protective because they're being trained to think in those terms, and to break through all the conditioning within a human being takes a lifetime of work.
yeah. I would argue that not argue against. I'm simply just saying I
Yeah.
would argue
Yes.
that part of the reason why young people have been pushed into this mentality of self-preservation is because our society and community is being degraded, right? To a point
Yes.
where we do
Yes.
not, we no longer have the guarantee
The
of like,
security,
yes, the security of a community-oriented environment, of the fact that like there will be safety nets, that there will be networks to fall back on because the folks who are in leadership and making policy decisions are intentionally getting rid of all of those safety nets. Yeah.
exactly.
And I think that you're kind of hitting on what I think is an iceberg of a conversation, and we're just kind of touching the tip, which is like, oh, truly, like, you know, even I spend our day to day, both in our day jobs and as content creators, talking about policy decisions and how policy decisions are going to deeply affect the day-to-day lives of people. What I
Yes.
think people do not talk about, which not for fault of theirs, but simply because there's so much going on in the immediate that it's hard to think about the long term. But I
Mm.
think that what people don't talk about is how these policy changes in the immediate are going to actually affect our culture in the long term.
Yes, that's
We
true.
are no longer, I mean, I cannot say with certainty that we will be the same type of America that we are today, let's say 10 years from now, right?
Yeah.
And it's disheartening because,
Mm.
and I have to go back to when I said, like it feels more aggressive than it has during my activism lifetime. I want to caveat that by saying that there have been times in America where we have been in much, much more dire straits than we are now, right? Like
Yeah.
there are, we have had, the reason we have had to have massive like revolutionary movements is because our country was in a very bad situation, like slavery and multiple other instances, like
Mm-hmm.
Japanese internment, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, I think the reason why to me and folks my age, this time feels emotionally challenging is because it's almost like, well, we're in 2025. Why is this still happening? Why,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
context should have changed by now. And so,
Yeah. Don't we already have the Voting Rights Act?
right. Yeah. And it's like, sometimes we talk a lot about the inequities that women experience living in the US. And
Yes,
I like to point out to people, I'm like, hey, women only received the right to vote in 1920. Like we
exactly.
only received the right to have credit cards and bank accounts so much later than men. And now, instead of that being like, wow, I can't believe it took us so long, we've actually circled back and somehow reached a point where, wow, I'm not sure if we're going to still have those rights
Yes,
a few years from now. Right. So,
exactly. Oh, yes, absolutely. You're right.
but I think that is what is challenging is like, we often talk about the policy decisions because that is the thing that we can fight back on. But you're
Yeah.
absolutely right in that those policy decisions ultimately have trickle down effects, which is a funny term to say in this context, given who
Yes.
originated that term, but like trickle down effects into our actual, like, the ways that our brains perceive each other, the ways that our
Yes.
brains perceive human connection. So I appreciate you bringing that up because I knew that in principle, but I don't know if I ever really put that together in like the picture you just painted for me. So,
Oh, I'm so glad.
yeah.
I'm so glad. Oh, absolutely. And people are definitely not trained to think critically.
Mm,
And that is part of it because our society is ruthless about conformity. And people who rebel often rebel in very conformist ways. The lack of a feeling of safety in the world makes us merge with other people's consciousness
mm,
in order to survive. And so everybody is going to rebel in the same way, or at least, some subgroup, or you're going to be influenced by your friends or whatever. And you're not thinking, you're not sitting there, you're not neutral, you have no perspective. No one has ever taught you how to look at the economy as a whole. Oh, capitalism is built on the exploitation of labor. That's how it happens. You know, that if somebody paid you the full value of your work, they wouldn't have a profit, and
right.
that would be the end of the company, right?
Mm,
So you say that to somebody, it's like, what? They don't get that's intrinsic. But now it's gotten more and more and more outrageous. But Marx was talking about this back in the 19th century. He could see exactly how, and he wasn't the only one who could see how the system worked. And we are taught by not so much words, but by experience. This is the way it is. It's the only way it can be,
right.
right? And
Yeah.
that's the way money should be distributed. I get what's on top, and I deserve it. I deserve to make $350, 350 more times than my employee. Yeah, at least in the old days, it was a barter system. You knew how many chickens the pig was worth.
Right. And
But
that value was kind of steady as opposed
exactly.
to influenced by the fact that the president randomly decided to print a bunch more money, right?
Right.
But I think so. You didn't explicitly say this, but what I read from what you just said is the normalization of different things that has happened, right? If you took a billionaire in today's society and put them in society 50 years ago, people would be like, this is not possible. And like, this shouldn't
Yeah.
be possible, right? And the truth is that
Yeah.
there's no such thing as an ethical billionaire because you don't gain that kind of wealth in a way that is
Yeah.
actually conducive to a productive, equitable society. And so
Yeah.
it is amazing to me how, so much of activism that we do, and I think our audience does, is starting to get tied to these structures that now feel like impossible to dismantle. Like truly, like I'm
Hmm.
not going to be able to take down a billionaire, right? As an
Hmm.
individual.
Hmm.
But what's interesting is when you take a step back and reflect and be like, well, those systems that at this point seem impossible to dismantle didn't even exist 50 years ago.
When it comes to what are we are for getting, money out of politics. We are for having workers on the boards of directors of all corporations. We're for co-ops. We're for really beginning to democratize the economy, the society, because we don't have that concept. That's why I bring up the potluck revolution, because everybody knows what that means. Everybody knows that it works.
Yeah.
And say, you see, you can have a different way of living. So excuse me for interrupting, but I just
Oh
wanted to
no,
finish that
that
point.
I actually love that point, and I think it's a nice closer actually to everything we've talked about because the truth is that in order to make a potluck revolution feasible, you have to do exactly what you just said, which is that true democracy has to be integrated into every element of society, not just our
Yes,
voting structure. Like
yes.
processes have to be democratic, and I think that is an incredibly poignant way of thinking about it. Like that's truly like in the world of activism, in the world of political resistance, in the world of being a parent, in the world of being a good friend, in the world of existing in a community that is supposed to be grounded in what makes humans human, there
In a
actually
family,
in a
in a
family.
family.
Exactly. There has to be, quote unquote democracy. Isn't the idea not democracy with a capital D, but democracy in the sense that people feel like they are equally represented, equally
Exactly.
valued, equally,
Exactly.
like performing. So it's just, yeah, I think that's a beautifully put way of framing it. And I really think that I am going to now try and think of my role in like our global potluck revolution because I
Oh,
think that's what we
wow.
have
I
to do.
love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Spiritual activism. This is how I define it. In the simplest terms, oneness, accountability, and mutual support.
Mm.
And we all have equal value just because of what we do and who we are. And that our values have to be more inner about who we, and absolutely that doesn't exist in our society. It just
Well,
doesn't
we're
exist.
gonna work to change that.
Well, I'll help you if I can.
I love it. Beth, thank you so much for this really honestly, genuinely uplifting conversation. I feel like I'm gonna try and perceive things with that lens moving forward. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Women in America. If you enjoyed it, share it with your network and follow us on social media at women_in America. See you next week.